Hello, my name is Charles Galagher, and today I'm going to be showing you guys my thesis, Inventory Management Made Easy. So my thesis actually came to me after experiencing a couple problems I had at an internship I held my freshman year. Essentially, my freshman year, I worked as an engineer for a local sprinkler systems company. And although I really enjoyed the engineering side of the work, when it came to the inventory/administration side of the work, it was not so fun, to say the least. For example, we ran into this problem where we would book a job with the belief we had certain items in our inventory. And then we'd get to the day that we were supposed to go on site, and we'd find out we do not have those items in our inventory, and we'd be left scrambling. Or we would show up on site and not really know where to go or who to talk to, due to the fact we would never establish a main contact. So, Inventory Management Made Easy is essentially my solution for inventory management when it comes to small businesses. Now, I've been saying this word a lot, inventory management. So I figure I should define what I mean when I say the word inventory management, because it can cover a pretty broad spectrum. The first thing I'm looking at is inventory, which you can probably guess because it's in the title. But when I'm saying inventory, it's not just the active items you currently have. I'm also diving in and looking at what are the jobs that you are booking, and what are the inventory items needed to complete those jobs, and then also, do you have that inventory needed to complete that kind of job? The next thing I'm looking at is employees. I think we can all agree that having an active roster of who is working for you and how to contact them is crucial for any business. But I take that one step further, and I ask also, what is it that these employees are doing for you? In the sense that if a job were to go wrong, who should you be contacting on your end to make sure this gets resolved? Now, this does add an extra layer of responsibility for employees, in the sense that it is their name on a project, so if something is going wrong, you're going to catch some fire. But there's also a reverse side to this, in the sense that it also leads to the opportunity for praise. In the sense that if you're getting a job done on time, or even done before the completion date, and companies are giving you compliments on certain jobs that you've been a part of, that's highlighted with this kind of system. And that's something that can lead to things like promotions. The next thing is orders. You can essentially think of orders as jobs. What is the name of this order? Who is contracting me for this order? What is the inventory needed to complete this order? And then what is the date I need to have this completed? And the last thing I look at is your customers. I've separated orders and customers because it's not uncommon for a big business to book maybe 5 different jobs with you that are working with 5 different people. So when you're looking through just an orders page, that can get really messy really fast. So I have the customers page as just kind of a general layout as who is working with you, how many active jobs do they have with you, and how many completed orders do they have with you. Now I'll give you guys a little demonstration. What you're seeing here is a pretty standard login page. I ask for your username and password. The only thing that might look a little bit out of the ordinary is that I also ask for your company name. I do have a registration link in case you didn't have an account, and then there's also a forgotten password link. And I'll show you the registration. So let's say I just want to register as an owner. This is, again, a pretty standard registration page. You're going to do the username, you're going to do the password, email, the whole 9 yards. The only thing that really stands out is right here, is maybe when I ask you your first pet name, your mother's maiden name. We saw the forgotten password link on the sign-up page, and that's what it's going to be used for. Essentially, it's just a layer of security that I have that you wouldn't want anyone just to be able to put in your username and reset your password. So this is my way of making sure that it really is you resetting your password. But to give you guys a more full idea of what inventory management made easy might look like, I did make a pre-made business to show you guys. So my business name is Carthage, my username is Chexter456, and my password is Charles, because at the time I didn't care about security. So right here what you're seeing is what I call the directory page. This is a way that you can traverse the entire website in case you didn't want to ever use a navigation bar. And the first thing we're going to look at is the inventory. So every inventory item is going to have a name, description, checkbox, quick add, quick subtract, and the quantity. In regards to the quick add and quick subtract, on the comb side, let's say I found 2 combs, I could add it really quickly here. And then for whatever reason, when I picked it up, I was clumsy and broke one, so I can take one away. And that's fine for quick things, but that can become really tedious and monotonous if you had to do it 100 times. And that's where the checkbox comes in. So let's say I want to do combs and nails. I had a big shipment come in of 100 of them. I go over to the mass edit, I can submit that, and now you see that both quantities have jumped by 100. This also works in the negative direction, in that of those 100, now I want to take away 50 of them. I can just do negative 50, submit that, and they both go down by 50. Now, something I should mention is that this actually updates in real time for every single client. So if someone else logged in, let's say one of my employees, and they also were looking at my inventory, and they would see those changes right now. And that's pretty crucial to an inventory management system. For example, if it didn't update in real time, and I was on the phone with a customer, and I saw I had like 200 screws, and this job requires 150 of them, and I booked the job. But then I forgot I have to reload my page. So then I go up and reload and realize I only actually have 30. Well, now I'm screwed, because I just booked a job that I didn't actually have the inventory for. So I went around and found the solution for that by making sure that this is updated at all times. So whatever you're adding, you'll know exactly at that moment. I'll also show you how you can add an item. So let's say I wanted to work with a hammer. I also made the description, hammer, and I started a quantity of 2. You'll see that it is alphabetized. So hammer got put between combs and nails. But then I realized the description of just hammer for my hammer is not very good, so I edited that. So you can go up here, hammer. Now it's a wood hammer, because I'm getting a little bit better at it. And then you can also update the quantity if I wanted to, so I bring it down to 1. You see the hammer stayed the same, it's in the same spot. The only thing that's changed is your description and your quantity. And then if I really just hated hammers, I don't want them anymore, you can just delete them as simple as this. And your table will resize, and you have it right there. The only other things I'll mention is that you can download this as a CSV. For those who've worked with data, you know that working with a CSV is pretty nice. Essentially, it stands for comma separated value. I can open up my Excel. My Excel is expired. It's going to tell me that. But I can click OK, and I'll show you guys still. It's the name, description, the quantity, what a pretty standard CSV would look like. But what I think is pretty neat is the print PDF. So actually, if I zoom in here, what you're going to see is at the very top, it actually has the date you decided to print this as a PDF. And this can be really useful if you want to do something like this every Monday and you want to check what is going out, what is staying in. If you're doing something like ordering and you're realizing things aren't really going out of that specific item, maybe order less than you usually do, or something's going out hot, then maybe start ordering more of those things because you're realizing you need that now. This is the way you can keep track of that. The next thing we'll be looking at is employees. Every employee will have a username, first name, last name, then ways to contact. Similar to what we saw in the inventory is download CSV and a print a PDF. The only 3 buttons we'll talk about, though, is add an employee, deleting an employee, and then employees to approve. So the only reason I'm actually able to see these 3 buttons is because I made myself the owner of this company. If I signed in as an employee, we'd actually only see download CSV and print PDF. So I did reserve the privilege of adding a company to only being or adding an employee to only the owner. So that'd be the only way you can add an employee. And so then, for example, if I was trying to mess with Google and I wanted to sign up as an employee of Google, and I went through the whole registration process, and then I tried to log in, it actually would tell me I've not been approved yet. And the only way I would get approved would be if the owner would go in, go to employees to approve, checkbox me, and approve me. I do this as essentially as just a layer of security for the owner, because you are working with pretty sensitive information, and you wouldn't want just anyone to go in there and be able to access that. Next we'll see is companies. So I'm working with 3 companies, first business, second business, and third business, because I'm very creative. I have my active orders and my completed orders. Again, you can download this as a CSV and print PDF. But where this gets a little bit interesting is that we do see 2 active orders here and 2 completed orders here. So we go over to the orders page, we should see 4 orders, and we should see 2 completed and 2 active. And if we don't, that's a right away red flag that something is wrong. But we do. And the active orders are denoted as green. Completed orders are going to be denoted as red. We do see the 2 completed and the 2 active. Again, you can download this as a CSV, print PDF. What you can do from the orders page is actually view a specific order. So if I wanted to see what was going on in the first order, I could look at that and see that I need leaves, nails, trees, and wood screws to complete this kind of order. Next we'll look at my orders. So my orders is actually a page designed specifically to the user signed in. So you see up here, Charles Galagher, that's me. I'm the user right now. My business is Carthage. So this is actually my orders that I've been assigned. This is where if I wanted to get a new order, if someone wanted to work with me and contract me, I'd add that order here. If for whatever something went wrong with a business, this is where I would delete that order. I also reserve the privilege of marking an order complete to only the person who's assigned that order, because I wouldn't want someone to just go in and mark first order completed when I know it's really not. And then what you'll see over here is that on the orders page, we could just view, but here you can add. So if I wanted to add something to first order, I would do that here. I can add an item, let's say paper clips, and I wanted 3 of them. I could submit that. We see it's been added. The reason I have it only able to be worked on by people who have been in charge of this order is because we wouldn't want anyone just to be able to go in and look at your orders and add miscellaneous items that aren't needed. So it's just another layer of security that you would have as an employee, that now that you are responsible for these jobs, you have full control over them. And then, of course, log out. Now, I will mention I did cover a lot of edge cases in this, in the sense that if someone tried to sign in with the same username that I already had in my database, they wouldn't be allowed to make that account. If someone tried to double up on an inventory item, for example, I made hammer. If someone else tried to make hammer again in the same inventory, it wouldn't allow them. It would tell them that items are already in that inventory. But in preparation for staying in time, we won't go too far into that. But what I do want to talk about is why this project was important to me. So I knew going into Carthage, I did want to try to make a web development project, at least before I graduated. And up to this point at Carthage, I had not had the opportunity to do so, so I thought I may as well do it now. This actually ended up lining up really well after Carthage, though, because I do have a job lined up after Carthage at a place called Aperio. And what they do is they integrate software essentially into websites, and they update legacy databases. And that went really well with this thesis, because that's essentially what I did. So even when it came to just going through the interview process, I was able to answer a lot of the questions they had for me just working on my thesis. And then also, I went back to that engineering company I talked about at the beginning, and I showed them this project. And they were actually really interested in it, and with a couple additions, they were talking about integrating into their system. So it's kind of neat that I have the potential to possibly commercialize this as well. Now I'll go a little bit into how I made it. In general, the framework I mostly use is ASP.NET. For styling, I use Bootstrap. The database was Firebase. And then I did have to use JavaScript in the end, but we'll get into that when I hit to that slide. But first, let's dive into ASP.NET. ASP.NET, for those who don't know, the ASP stands for Active Server Pages. What it is essentially, it's an open source framework that's server-side only, and essentially was built by Microsoft to help build web applications. And one of the benefits of using ASP.NET is that it is strictly server-side. And what that can be is if you want to ever get code generated, or you want to generate something with the code before it hit the browser, that's where that becomes useful. Another reason I used ASP.NET is that it's really easy to use, especially when you're using the IDE Visual Studio. Actually, even when you create a new ASP.NET program, they actually have a default page that you can work off of, where you essentially edit their similar HTML page. It's actually an ASP.x page, but it's very similar to HTML. And not only does it generate that for you, but it also will generate the C# code that's going to go in correspondence with that title. So it keeps it really clean for you. It made it really easy to maintain that, because I never had to worry about, did I not make the correct file, or do I not have something attached to this? It kept it all in line. And then also in using Visual Studio, it provided me a really nice framework, or a very nice toolbox and designer options. So one of the views you can have is you can view the code, but you can also switch it over and just view the page before even having to open up a browser. And it gives you sort of an idea of what it would look like. This also allowed me to drag and drop things if things were not lining up correctly. And it allows you also to do quick styling, such as changing the color if I ever had to. But in talking about styling, we're going into Bootstrap. So I did use Bootstrap for this project. Bootstrap essentially is, for every row, it's 12 columns. So if I had 3 things I wanted to line up, I do a column 4, and a column 4. It would format it for me, round off the edges, really just make it look beautiful. And that saved a lot of time, because as I mentioned before, I had no web development experience. So using something like CSS was like black magic. I had no idea how to format, styling was scary, and really Bootstrap with just a couple of keywords can make something like CSS that would have been 35 lines long down to just 2 words. So it saved me a lot of time. But now, what I will mention is that it's really hard to break out of. When working with Bootstrap, it's kind of like signing a contract, where if you start with Bootstrap, you have to end with Bootstrap. Because if you start adding your own CSS styling on top of it, the formatting starts to become unaligned, and your styling starts to get a little bit messy. So if I were to actually redo this project, I'd probably actually work with Birdman Neat and Sass, because it gives me a little bit more freedom and to actually do my own designs. For the database, I use Firebase. At first, I was just looking for a NoSQL database, because I already had SQL experience. I wanted to try something new. But what really made me settle on Firebase was the fact that data is synced across all clients in real time. As I was mentioning earlier in my presentation, that's what allows me to essentially update the clients who are looking at the inventory, that everyone gets that update at the same time. And if I hadn't used Firebase, I'm not sure if I would have had the capabilities I would have done with this project. But now we'll go a little bit into JavaScript. So at first, I didn't actually want to use JavaScript. I wanted to have everything handled in the ASP.NET code or the C# code. But what I had found is that because ASP.NET was so server-side, and then Firebase was very client-side, when I tried to mash the two together, they did not play well. I did eventually get ASP.NET to push and pull items from Firebase, but the documentation just really wasn't there. And what I needed to do for this project in the time that I had, I didn't think I'd be able to make it very far if I just kept trying to force ASP.NET code to work how I wanted it to. And then every time I'd look for suggestions, it would just be like, why aren't you using JavaScript? So eventually, I changed over and I went to JavaScript. And I think it worked a little bit better because JavaScript is so client-based, and then Firebase was client-based. So putting the two together was like a match made in heaven. Also, there was like a lot of documentation on it. So many people have integrated JavaScript or have used JavaScript with Firebase. So it only took like 2 or 3 tutorial videos to really get me up and running. So now my advice. As I just said, this is going to be a little bit of a do as I say, not as I did. And that first one is going to be don't mix ASP.NET and JavaScript. I found that when trying to use the two, because I still had at times, I was pushing and pulling with ASP.NET, and I was also pushing and pulling with JavaScript, that depending on what I was pushing and pulling, it was getting really messy in the sense that the data types it was returning was not what I expected. The way I was expecting it to be displayed was not what I wanted it to be displaying, and I think if I had just stuck with one language, that could have been a lot cleaner, and it would have probably saved me a lot more time. So if you're going to do a project like this and you want to use Firebase, stick with JavaScript. My next advice, as we just heard with Drew's, is that read documentation. When I say read documentation, I don't just mean like skim it, I mean like really read it. Because I can't tell you how many times I fell into the problem of I wanted a quick solution, so I'd skim it, I'd find the code I thought I'd want, I would throw it in my project, and I'd run it, and nothing would work the way I wanted it to. And I would have known that if I had just read the documentation first. And I think by reading the documentation, you also just know in general what you're actually putting into your project, and that saves a lot of time. And then my biggest advice is that finishing thesis is not a race. And what I mean by that is don't just try to get it done as fast as you can. I definitely know I'm the kind of person that when a project is signed and it's due by Friday, I want it done by Wednesday. And if it's not done on Wednesday, I have so much anxiety over it. But when I applied that to thesis, I found that I wasn't really enjoying it as much, and it became more of a stress than something I wanted to do. In the sense that I wasn't really rewarding myself with time that I should have taken just like to get away from it. Where if I had finished a page, I probably should have stepped away for it a little bit, but instead I would just move on to the next page. And then I get that page and I would just move on to the next page. Where I would wake up, I'd work on my code, fall asleep thinking about my code, wake up the next day, work on my code. And because of that, I became really burnt out really fast. That by the end of first semester, I didn't even want to touch my thesis. And it really took me until after J-term for even me wanting to work on it again. So for those who haven't done thesis yet, and you are someone who feels like you need to get everything done right away, I would say approach thesis in a different mentality. Because I know I didn't enjoy thesis as much as I could have if I had just taken my time with it. Now some personal reflections. I do feel like I'm a more confident programmer now. Up to this point, every project I had or every assignment, I knew that if I got stuck or something wasn't working, I could always just ask a professor. But when it came to thesis, if you got stuck, that's on you. Not in the sense that you couldn't approach your professors for help, but it really was your project that you needed to be working on. And that was really scary at first because I was working with a bunch of different frameworks I didn't understand. I was working with a new language. Really everything was new to me. But the fact that I was able to work with a new framework, work with a new language, and still produce a product that I was proud of made me feel really confident that in the future, if I ever get thrown into a situation where I'm working with frameworks or languages that I don't know, I have the ability to adapt and use those frameworks well. Another thing is that time spent refactoring isn't lost time. And I know I didn't feel that way at the start when I was deleting code, but I do recognize it now. And I think the best example of that was when I was deleting my ASP.NET code and substituting it with JavaScript. I remember deleting it and just thinking of all the time I could have saved if I just hadn't done any of that. But really, as I mentioned previously, if I hadn't made that change to JavaScript, I don't think I would have been able to make the product I have now. So don't be afraid to go back and fix code that you feel isn't already working, because if it's not working now, it's not going to work later. And then finally, front-end development is what I want to do. And I kind of discovered that after doing this thesis. This kind of like skyrocketed me into like wanting to take the web development J-term here. Then after the web development J-term here, I was hooked, and it led me to taking my independent study this semester in user interfaces, because I just want to learn more about it. But all that started after doing this thesis. Any questions? Sure.
You said this was kind of your first time getting into some else and web development frameworks and stuff. So how was it working with ASP.NET?
That's a good question.
Repeat the question.
So the question was, how is it working with ASP.NET with your first time doing web development? At first, I will say it didn't feel intuitive. Having to work the C# code and then having that appear on that web page was a really wild concept to me at the time. Because any HTML that I had seen before was all just static, so nothing was changing on it. So actually having to like look at tutorials and seeing how it was actually updating and grabbing those elements correctly, at first was difficult, but after doing it a couple times, it was really easy to work with.
If you were given any more time to work on this project, maybe after the presentation, what kind of features would you add to the directory and like your keep track of users?
That's a good question. The question was, if I had more time, what are some features I'd like to add? Honestly, the biggest one that I would have liked to add was that before you can mark a project as finished, making sure that your inventory actually had those items and having it tell you whether or not those inventory items were there. Essentially, it'd be like you couldn't mark something as finished until you actually was able to complete it, and then once completing it, taking those inventory items out. But what I was finding that when working with Firebase, if I tried to search on a keyword that wasn't there, it just kept crashing my site because it essentially was like broken promises of what was happening. So I made that on a branch, but I never completed it. But if given more time, I would work on that more.
Does this work on mobile or because of Bootstrap, or were you deciding maybe to like do an app instead?
It does work on mobile. I can show you it if you want. Mobile. Bootstrap, essentially, if you wanted it in a small screen or you wanted a regular screen, you can designate that. So the sign-in page didn't really have much to change, but the directory page did change a little bit. The only one that I found trouble with doing mobile was the inventory. It didn't look bad necessarily, but you did have to like scroll if you wanted to see the complete item. I couldn't get that to shrink, the table to shrink completely into the size I wanted it to. But yes, it is mobile friendly.
Would you want to just make it work best on mobile, or would you, if you were going to make it for mobile, would you also just make an application like that?
The question was, if I wanted to make it mobile, would I just make the application instead, or would I just focus on making it mobile? I was really focusing on trying to do a web application, so I think I would have stuck with making it a website, but if I had focused on making it mobile, I would actually stick with Bootstrap because it already has the documentation there to do it. Yeah.
So you mentioned that this was primarily for small companies. What changes would you implement to attract larger companies?
That's a good question. So larger companies, they're going to have a bigger database in terms of inventory, in terms of people they're working with. And right now, when you're in the small business, if it overflows on the screen, it is a scrollable. But right now, I don't have anything that you would be able to search for. So if you wanted to just search down and only see specific companies, I don't have that. And you probably would want that in a larger company. Because if you literally had to go to every single company you work for, it could be too long. And then also, I would maybe stray away from using Firebase. Because at a certain point, if you use too much data, you do have to start paying for it. And something that local businesses probably don't want to do is pay for their databases. And Firebase is free to an extent.
By the end of your project, how much of your code was JavaScript versus ASP.NET, and how was it at the beginning?
I would say that the majority of the code still is ASP.NET because that's where the majority of the styling was also being done in terms of like the .aspx. That's where you put the bootstrap in. But JavaScript definitely became the main form of pushing and pulling. Really the only times I kept ASP.NET connected to Firebase was whenever a page load was happening, and that's how I'd be able to create the table without having to click a button. So it's just like on page load. Okay.